What is up, guys? Thank you so much for being here. So today I'm finally getting around to doing a video I've been wanting to do for quite a while, because I'm going to compare what I think are the two best options for an ultra wide zoom lens on your Sony APS-C camera. Start off by saying that I didn't get any of these lenses for free. I bought both of them with my own money. So I've owned the Tamron for a couple of years now, and I bought the Sigma at release last year, so it's been about a year now. So I have plenty of experience with both, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but I'm gonna start by talking about the actual specs and the build of the lenses, comparing that, and then we'll get into all the testing that I did so you guys can see side by side some of those results. And towards the end of the video, I'll wrap it up with which one I'm gonna keep and which one I'm selling. And if you guys have any comments or questions, if I missed something, definitely let me know in the comments down below. I always do my best to get to every single one of those, or even if you guys just want to say what's up, I definitely appreciate that as well. Getting into the specs and build of the lenses, the Tamron weighs 11.8 ounces or 335 grams, while the Sigma weighs 9 ounces or 255 grams. Tamron is 3.4 inches long and the Sigma is 2.5 inches long. Tamron has a minimum focus distance of 5.9 inches, while the Sigma is 4.6 inches. They each have a 67mm filter thread size, which is awesome because a lot of my lenses do, and so I'm able to use those same filters. And then on the back here, they each have a little rubber gasket, and so that really helps out with kind of dust and splash resistance. It's not waterproof or anything like that, but it does make a big difference to not get some of those little dust spots on your sensor, which is always nice. The Tamron is 11mm to 20mm and goes f2.8 to f16, while the Sigma goes f2.8 to f22, and it's a 10 to 18mm. So obviously the Sigma is significantly smaller and lighter. Overall, this one just feels more high quality because something about the design, even the way the lens hood is designed and the lens cap, they're both kind of a matte black, but this one does have a little bit more shine to it. The Sigma overall is just a little bit sleeker. I think it's just because the Tamron looks a little bit bulkier. I mean, even like I said, the lens caps with the Tamron, this one is definitely thicker. And then same thing with the rear cap. Everything's just a little bit bulkier and thicker looking on the Tamron. You can tell it's clearly just a little thicker. And then as for those lens caps, this one is very traditional. You turn it and it pops off. And the Sigma is a little bit odd because it turns, but like a smidgen. It's just kind of unique. When I first got it, it was a little bit confusing, and it was actually really frustrating me because I thought something was defective. It's because I'm so used to every other lens I've ever owned. Obviously you put it on and you turn it. And this guy, you just line up the markings and it kind of just pops on, and that's it. There's not really any turning involved. Like I said, there might be a smidge of a turn to pop it off, but it really just pops on there and then it's locked on. So it's kind of odd. It feels like it's not secure, but it definitely is. I haven't had any issues so far. The Tamron tapers up towards the very beginning of the lens, and then it's even all the way through. And the Sigma is a little bit different. It's even most of the way through and then tapers up right towards the end. That's another reason why the Tamron has a slightly bulkier look. But what's funny is that this weight and size is actually what you would consider a pretty small compact lens. Like, it's not big whatsoever. It just looks bulky when you're comparing it to this tiny, tiny little thing. Both lenses start off on the more zoomed in range, and then as you extend the barrel, they go wider, which might be a little bit different for, you know, what you're used to with most zoom lenses. As you extend the barrel, you're gonna kind of go more telephoto, but something about how they had to do these wide lenses, they both work the same way. The only difference is that this one, when it's on your camera, you actually are going counterclockwise, and this guy, you're turning it clockwise. Last part of the build I want to mention is the actual zoom rings and the focus ring. So the focus ring and the zoom ring on the Sigma are both a little bit quieter, which I'll let you listen in a second. But the focus ring is very, very smooth on the Sigma. It's not quite as grippy, but it's smooth all the way through. And then obviously the zoom ring has a little bit more resistance to it, and it's a little bit more of a grippy, more aggressive rubber texture, which I actually really like. And then the Tamron, which is in reverse compared to the Sigma, where the zoom ring is in the back and the focus ring is towards the front. Same kind of thing, focus ring's a little bit narrower, pretty smooth, maybe not quite as smooth, but still pretty smooth and works great. And then the zoom ring, like the Sigma, has a much more aggressive rubbery texture, which again I really like, and it's a little bit wider. And obviously that's right up next to the microphone, so it's gonna be exaggerated. Might be a little bit difficult to tell when they're both that close to the mic, but I can tell you that this one definitely has just a little bit more sliding noise. Okay, let's go ahead and get into some of the testing that I did. You'll get to see right now that both of these lenses have some pros over the other, and so you'll kind of get to, I guess, form your opinion on which of those means more to you. We'll go ahead and start off with sharpness, since that is one of the more important things. They're both very good, and I've taken very nice videos and photos with both, but when I took an actual photo of just some planks of wood when I was on a little pier dock thing at a pond, one thing I really noticed is in the middle, it's hard to tell which one's sharper. Maybe the Sigma was just a tiny bit sharper, but it's very close. But on the edges is where you really notice a difference, because the Sigma was definitely sharper and it wasn't even really that close. This one just gets very soft in the corners, and the Sigma, it's not as sharp in the corners as it is in the middle, but it's still significantly sharper in the corners than the Tamron was. But I took the photos at f2.8, f5.6, and then I think like f11 or something. It was pretty consistent throughout all three of them when it comes to how they compare. So the photos that I'm showing you are just from f5.6, because that's typically like the sharper end of the lens on pretty much most lenses. When it comes to autofocus and focus breathing, it was really close. To be honest, they're both very good. They're both very reliable in autofocus, and when you're switching focusing points, if it's drastic or whatever, it can kind of hunt where it's kind of struggling and can't quite decide what to focus on. I didn't really notice any of that with both of these. If anything, maybe the Tamron was a little snappier when it comes to just how quick it snaps over to the subject. And this one, while still a smooth transition, was maybe slightly slower, but I'll leave that up to you guys, because to be honest, it was very close. And same thing with focus breathing. Again, if you're focusing from something closer to something further, oftentimes lenses will have a certain level of breathing, which you'll see out on the edges when you're doing that rack focus. It'll kind of either zoom in a little or zoom out a little. And again, it was very close between the two, but I think there was a slightly more breathing on the edges with the Tamron than there was on the Sigma. Moving on to chromatic aberration, which is something that typically pops up when you have a very high contrast scene. Normally is gonna pop up as color fringing, which is gonna be a green or blue or magenta, depends on the lens, on those points of contrast between the dark and the bright background. So what I did to try and show you guys is I took a photo with each of the same scene, basically a chain link fence with a bright background. And I'll try and zoom in on these photos as I'm talking, but it really seemed like the Tamron was a little bit more controlled towards the middle. Maybe it's just because the chromatic aberration was showing up as a magenta with the Sigma, and with the Tamron, it pops up as a blue. Especially when we take a close look in the corners, you'll see that they're both a little bit worse. Obviously, they're both a little bit more well controlled in the center. I feel like the Tamron doesn't seem as bad, even if it has the same amount, just because that blue blends in a lot better, and that magenta just really seems to kind of pop out. But again, this is if you're looking very close, and I don't know if you would just notice that in a live video. When it comes to distortion and vignetting, we'll go back to those photos of the wooden boards on the little dock I was on. Now, it probably has something to do with the fact that I had them both on the widest point, and the Sigma is 1 millimeter wider. And I don't have these photos, but I did look through both of them at 15, and it seemed like the Sigma still had a little bit more distortion. And as for vignetting, it was closer, but I do think that the Sigma was a little darker there in the corners. It kind of depends on what matters to you, because in video, some of these things obviously are not as easy to fix, but in photo, chromatic aberration, vignetting, distortion, all those things are literally just a one-click fix. Kind of depends on what you do more, but I do more video, so it's just something that you might have to deal with. But again, it's not terrible on any of these. Now, these last two tests were not close like the rest of them. Each of these was drastically better than the other. The first of these two was the light flare control. So if you're out on a sunny day and you have your lens at a certain angle from the sun, typically you're gonna get a sun flare. So I took these two lenses and I stood in a spot where the sun was shining very brightly through the trees, and I purposely, at a certain angle, passed over the sun. That way you could see how bad that sun flare was, or just what it looked like, because sometimes people like the sun flare. And in this test, the results were very drastic because the Sigma basically didn't even have a sun flare. I say that, but I have taken a few photos in the past and a few video shots where there is a very slight little sun flare. Meanwhile, the Tamron had no problem creating a sun flare, which, again, if you like the sun flare, then it looks cool. But if you think it's distracting because you can't always control it, obviously, then this is definitely the loser. So for that test, it was very drastic and a clear win for the Sigma. And the other test that, at least in my opinion, was kind of drastic was the bokeh. And so those are going to be those out of focus balls of light that are typically in the background anytime you have a shallower depth of field. And obviously with an ultra wide lens, it's a little harder to create that bokeh in the background, but it's still nice to know what it looks like, because I mean, if you do zoom in to 18 or 20, depending on which one you're using, and you're a little closer to your subject, then you are going to be able to get some of that nice bokeh in the background. And I'm personally not too picky when it comes to how the bokeh looks. The reason I say that this was a clear win, and that win was for the Tamron, because when I zoom in on the bokeh of the Sigma, you'll see in the middle of each bokeh ball have an inner portion and then a very clear outer ring that's not as dark. It's a little lighter, I guess you could say. And on the Tamron, that just wasn't the case. It was pretty even all the way through. Also, something that some people don't like is when the bokeh is a little bit more cat-eyed. And on the Sigma, it's clearly more cat-eyed than the Tamron. The Tamron's a little closer to being more round, especially in the center. Obviously, they're both going to be more cat-eyed over in the corners. The Tamron is just not nearly as bad. And even towards the center, the Sigma still has a little bit of that cat eye going on. So for me, that's a pretty drastic win for the Tamron, because that's just not something that you can change, at least not easily that I'm aware of. Now, as for which one of these guys I plan on keeping, well, it was a pretty tough decision, to be honest, because even though I'm not a bokeh snob, I do really like how it looks on this one. For the way that I use these lenses, that's not quite as important because I'm typically just using this for vlogging or something like that. And even though I definitely use these sometimes for more cinematic shots, I have other prime lenses that I can use if I really need that. It was a tough decision, and you guys can let me know down below which one you would pick. But for me, I am gonna end up going with the Sigma. Obviously, they each had some advantages. Some that are easily fixed, some that you can't fix. But I think what does it for me is the sharpness on this guy being just a little bit sharper corner to corner. And that's something that, I do a lot of video and you can't really adjust too much. And then the other big thing for me is just the overall size. Even though, again, this is by no means a large lens, I just really like having such a small compact lens, because even if it's not on my camera, it just takes up so little space in my backpack. And I do a ton of hiking. I'll go to alpine lakes and other cool adventures like that. Plus, since I do some vlogging when I'm on adventures or on vacation, it is always nice to have a smaller form factor, because it does bring a little less attention when I'm sitting here talking out in public. It would have been really cool if this was like a 10-20 like the Sony power zoom one. But the reason I don't consider that power zoom to be in the top two like these two are is because both of these have that f2.8 aperture, and I'm just not willing to compromise on that. So if you're looking for a vlogging or travel lens, or even anything for like interiors, real estate, or even landscapes, then both of these are great options. Again, this is the one that I'm going with, the Sigma. Let me know which one you guys would choose. And with all that being said, I just want to thank you so much for watching till the end of the video. If you're still here, I highly appreciate it. And if you can hit the like button, it's a super simple thing. It takes about 1 second, but makes a huge difference for my channel. So I would appreciate that as well. And if you like this kind of content, anything that has to do with camera gear, lens reviews, camera backpacks, some drone stuff, anything like that, definitely subscribe. I've got a decent amount of videos on my channel, and I'm going to be putting out a lot more in the future. So thank you so much again for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.